Thursday, February 2nd. This meeting's in person, can also be viewed on local cable channel 1303 or on the internet at townhallstreams.com, select Bucksport. Roll call, Jake?
Counselor Eastman?
Here.
Counselor Morrison?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Bissonnette?
Here.
Mayor Stewart?
Here.
Counselor Ormsby is absent. Counselor Bishop?
Here.
Counselor Rain?
Here.
Next is goals and objectives discussion. Town manager has put together an update of things that were happened during 2022, things that are being worked on in 2022 to continue into 2023. So, where would you guys like to start? Has everybody had a chance to look at this?
We did,
Yep.
yeah. 22 was a big year. Looked like a lot got done.
Yeah, I would agree. What, a couple of things that we've got out there is obviously with the PPI that we've spent. How much do we have left on that?
The PPI grant that report should be issued, I think, by May of this year, and then immediately following that, we'll be applying for the VPI, which is the 80% federal, 10% town, 10% state funding to fully pay for the cost of what that report says. However, that would also be an item on the November ballot, because even though it's the majority is funded through state and federal sources, the referendum is that if you're going to spend more than $300,000, and it doesn't say what the sources are, it just says spend more than that on a project, that you have to have town approval. So that this will be a process. There'll be a report, there'll be a second application, and then I said that. There'll be a report, the council will have a review process for that and determine if the things identified in the report are the sort of what they want to see Main Street look like for the next 20 years, and then apply for the VPI and put that out for referendum to see if the people of the community support that kind of explanation. That's a big deal in terms of the first report getting done, and then the VPI application and the referendum stuff.
I assume that your update is on the website too for people to see.
Yes, it is on town's website, on the calendar, under this meeting. If you can click on it, anyone can see this report that is there too. And I also put the agenda on our Facebook page with a note that people could see the full stuff on our website as well.
Okay. Councilor Ormsby sent a note and talked about that, appreciative of the work that was completed and still working on. He feels particularly strongly about moving forward to make a solid decision about the Historical Society. If we're not going to do something, let's make that clear. If we are, let's make that clear. I believe we need to move forward with a plan for the Historical Society and protect our history. Next, he said we should move forward with an overhaul of the town dock and expand the year-round docking. We always need to continue improving and keeping our roads safe. This is an ongoing process and it should remain a priority. Continue to upgrade our video and audio systems in public areas like the dock, the walkway, and the playgrounds. And looking deeper into recreational areas for children in our town. As Sue has put down here, some of the work that we have in progress, we have a third year of retaining walls. How many walls do we have left on that, Sue? Do you know?
This is one more after this one, but what this year would be is, the wall that isn't eligible for state funding. There's one wall, because of the way it was initially funded, that isn't eligible.
Is that on Central Street?
Yes, that one, and also, we can't apply, we can't kick that one out of order, because we can't apply for that for this year, because we're doing the Central Street MPI for the turnover of that from the state to the town, that involves a project that, for some improvements there, and we can't do it, two things in the same year. So if we do the third year, that Central Street wall, and then in 24, 25, we can apply to finish the last one, which is the cemetery and that one there. So there are really 2 years left, but it's because primarily one of those walls has to be done separately.
Okay. Other work in progress is Bucks Mills major culvert project.
We actually have,
That's starting pretty right off, isn't it?
no, no.
Oh, okay.
Not quite. That's contracted to Wardwell, but I was contacted by DEP because they have an opportunity to put in a federal grant application to do the culvert at, I think it's Whitesbrook area, but it's the second one there, and that if they got that both the Bucks Mills one that is already approved and that one could be done for the same amount of money that we have already appropriated, and Fed and state money would pay for the rest of it, which, if we could get that, would be really good, because this second one is like $1 million to do that. So if we could get both of those done, it would be a really good thing. So they've applied for that, and the application was due on the 6th, but since it didn't involve any more financial expenditure from the town in order to do this, it seemed like it would be silly not to at least see if it's possible to get those both done for the same amount that we were paying for just one of them.
Which culvert on Whitesbrook, where are you talking?
I would have to look at the map they sent.
I think it's
yeah.
just before Ranzoni's, that one there.
That's the
That-
bottom, the
yeah,
bottom.
that's
of
the
It's
one-
the big one.
That's the
yeah.
one they're preparing to work on.
Well, that's what I thought
They're
too.
calling that Stubbs Brook,
Oh, they're calling that Stubbsbrook, then Whitesbrook is the one down where
by the Turkey Path.
Brian White used to
Turkey
live
Path.
down there,
Okay.
right?
Well, that's probably a tributary to it, but
Right.
I think the main brook actually is the one right there by Turkey Path.
Well, what DOT is doing
Huh?
right now is related to the bridge there, and they're responsible for
They've
the
got their signs
bridge.
up. They've
That's
got
why
their signs
DOT's
up
out
at
there,
the-
we own
at the foot of
Bucks
Cotton Hill.
Mills, but
Right.
Yep.
they're working on the bridge.
They're working on the bridge and not the culvert.
That's right.
Okay. So I saw the signs up there too. I was wondering if that was
Yeah.
the same thing.
No, that's the bridge. I asked Jay and they were setting up to work on the bridge because they have oversight of that bridge, and this other stuff there's nothing even engineered yet to look at this other culvert.
Okay.
All those brooks pretty much converge and go right behind your house,
They
right?
do, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yep. PPI grant, we've talked about. Town dock replacement funding.
We still have our oar in the water for the Holtracom settlement money, but Rich also has sent in a letter of intent for congressional designated funding. Senator Collins' office was requesting information from communities that had important shovel-ready projects, which ours is everything but, hire a contractor. And so Rich sent in a letter of intent, and we'll be following through on that process to see if we get a congressional designation out of this coming session.
Historical Society future. Let's take a minute on this one, and, because I think it's on everybody's mind here, and I think like Danny said, we probably ought to try to figure out what our decision is gonna be and make it.
We haven't actually met with the Historical Society, correct?
They were here last
At
year?
an infrastructure committee meeting last year.
Yeah.
Okay, recently.
October, I think.
Yeah.
September,
Yeah.
October last year.
I remember there was a presentation that was made to some degree, but there was nothing.
There's been a couple. There's been one 2 years ago that ended up being, what, 2.5 million or something?
Oh, yeah, that was
4 years ago.
Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
little
That
further
long
back,
ago?
but,
Yeah.
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 Anyway, can we call a meeting with them to some degree, get them, can we all just sit down and talk to them and see if they want to plan to grow their membership, want to expand their hours, and are willing to preserve the artifacts that are getting damaged by moving them to a safer location in the meantime?
Well, I mean, if we're gonna do that, do we also need to do some legwork on potential landing spots for them, you know? Have some conversation with American Legion to see if there's even a receptiveness on their end, or, you know, get into the building and see what one of us, some of us, Rich, somebody, to see what's going on there, to see if it's even a possibility.
Yeah, you had talked about putting this through your budget process to see sort of where you
Mhm.
ended up financially, but I think that probably the bigger question
I think that's
is,
cart before the horse, though.
the bigger question is that building the right place in the right location with the right price tag for what the town might be willing to invest in this? And, you know, there are certainly some people on the Historical Society who strongly believe that the only presence they should have is on Main Street, that they should be, and they've been very clear with that. And then there are others that are less committed to that and more committed to the idea of a safe, non-moldy, the stuff is deteriorating location being the priority.
Just real quick, just as a straw poll, and my opinion has changed, thanks, Mark, you've changed it on me. I mean, what are folks' thoughts of the spot on Main Street on the waterfront? Where it's our piece of property, but they're building, I mean.
We're not even sure it's their
We haven't
building.
even determined that yet.
It's not clear that
Oh,
they
it's not.
have a deed to- or anything to that building. There's no UCC, there's nothing.
Oh. Well, anyway, I'll start. I agree with you that I think there's a better use for that space, my opinion, than that there, and
Mhm.
I think we need to talk to them, to your point, and figure out where we can find a place that is sufficient to store this stuff, if that's where we wanna go.
I would really like to see any money spent match its productivity. The 100 hours a year scenario for its location doesn't match,
Sure.
so.
Yeah, no, like I say, I've spun around 180 degrees from where I was, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a, same here, it's a vital piece of, we need to protect it, but Main Street might not be the prime location.
And even if it was, let's say we were to agree that it was, and I'm not at that point, but let's say we did. And we were willing to commit to that building to the degree that's been proposed. Like, I'm making a running list of things that could potentially end up on the ballot this year for funding. Like,
Yeah.
between the BPI, if we were to go that direction and put the Historical Society on top of a fully, plumbed and heated foundation with restrooms and all that, that's gonna go before the voters. There's a couple other things here that I think could easily go before the voters, if not this year, next year, and that's all well and good, but I just, if we've got 4 items on the ballot for things that are funded at a rate of over $300,000, that's gonna be a hard sell.
Unless you have a big funding stream that you can note that such as the VPI, that,
Mhm.
you know, this, it costs you, we're actually spending this much money, not
That's
the
a huge thing. Exactly.
historical society, which would be a total out of pocket. The town dock, which would be not, it would be an expenditure, but
Mhm.
primarily from grant, but,
But I think you're right, Mr. Mayor, we've gotta make that decision, we've gotta say we're not willing to entertain that as a council, that we're not, you know, for what we're seeing for use, and what that property could potentially be, for what you're asking, we're not willing to go down that road, and that gives them guidance, because I'm with Councilor Ormsby. Every year that goes by is the potential that the artifacts that are in that building are getting further damaged, and if that's a result of indecision, that doesn't sit well.
Right. Well, on the other side of that is, I mean, I think we've all discussed, the town would end up owning that building. I mean, there's no other way to really do that. I mean, they don't have the resources to change the roof, so if something breaks, we would end up paying for it, so we might as well own it. Does the town wanna own 1, 2, 3, 3 properties along our main street?
I think we've all been talking
We
about getting
already
out of
own
the real
the
estate
property.
business.
Right. We own it, but do we want the municipality to control this piece and especially that piece? They're both vital to a downtown.
I don't know, you got a mouse in your pocket, cause you're saying we. I don't
We
wanna,
as a
I
town.
don't wanna own it, I don't wanna have anything to do with it.
Yeah, I think that's where we're at, so I think to Steve's point, I think if we can try to get them in here at some point, okay, here's where we're at, where are you guys, how does this fit into what you wanna do?
I mean, do we feel it's important to try to present an option and try to pursue that American Legion aspect?
Well, does I understand that Rich is sort of looking, we're trying to find something, or maybe we can direct him first before we call them in, so we do have something to give them.
Sure. That's fine.
Yeah.
well, I mentioned that before, and the fact that it wasn't on Main Street was not well received.
Well, I get that,
Just,
yep. Yep.
That's fine, but
I'm
Main
not
Street
saying
with
that we
100
shouldn't
hours a
do
year.
that,
Right.
because the American Legion is also struggling. That building needs windows and it needs a furnace, but windows and a furnace and some interior stuff is not $300,000. And it might serve 2 uses that both are present here.
Okay. So let's see what Rich can come up with over the course of the next little bit, and then maybe we can get folks together here and,
Can we, are you gonna hate me if I want you to narrow down a little bit? Can we, what's a reasonable timeline?
well, my little bit to Rich is just wrapping him upside the head,
Right.
so we get, within a month or so.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, I mean, this is something because to Paul's point too, if all of a sudden we switch gears again and decide to put this on the ballot, we gotta do that fairly quick too. you know,
Right.
So,
That's why,
yeah, yeah, so I think that if we can get Rich sometime, through the month of February and then 1st of March or something, and then we'll also be going into budget season and all those things will tie in, so we'll have a better idea.
Yeah, we should have a meeting prior to April 1st, because
Yep.
April's when you're gonna
Yep.
start your budget stuff, so.
Everybody okay with that?
That's
Yep.
great.
Like I say, I'm with Jim too. I'm tired. I think we've talked about it for a number of years of being in the real estate business, and we shouldn't be, so. All right. Next up in progress is Bay Festival 2023, town organized. And where do we stand with that right now? Is that concept still, or was that?
And it's a reality.
Yeah.
They've started plans, they had their first meeting this past, organizational meeting this last Friday. They assigned duties and set up committees and did all those kind of things. They will be coming to the council for some funding
Yeah.
for this project, but they're really well organized in this effort, so.
Okay. 27 Main Street.
Well, that's on there because it's been on there every year for.
And I don't want it on there anymore. I don't know. I mean, I know we've had a bunch of tire kickers and stuff over the course since we've had that, and
I do think we've got a different vein proposal coming up on the 11th that isn't what we've seen. It's not, it's not subsidized, it takes into consideration commercial, so let's see what comes out of that.
That's, economic development's got that next, but it's on here because.
because it's always been on here.
No, because there's actually life at the end of this road. perhaps.
You think so?
Yes.
Maybe, okay.
But I would say, if I'm permitted, that if this proposal doesn't go anywhere, maybe you guys look at just putting it up for sale and stepping back from it and just letting it, whoever buys it does what they're gonna do.
That, you're not wrong. I mean, it's, you know, we sort of hand-tied folks but I think we'll give it another shot here, but I think like a lot of these things, we gotta start making decisions to wean ourselves away from these things that we keep seeing over and over and over again, so. Spring Fountain, dangerous building appeal. Speaking of things that we see all the time.
Yes, we still have, the court still has nothing. We're almost 2 years out from when that appeal was filed. We got our information, our attorney reached out to the attorney for Spring Fountain to ask if this deal that was supposed to be moving forward was going to, and their attorney said he didn't think so, but this was hard on the heels of the fact that the buyer was in to see us last week and talked about who was financing and all this other kind of stuff, so.
Has anybody been in there recently, or?
Well, yes, because, Luke, who was there that said all the doors were kicked in again and?
Not all, but some. It was the potential buyer that came in and was talking to us. And he said that he tried to secure some of the doors again, but, and there hadn't been anybody up there since the snow
Yeah.
came down, because we could see. But the police have also arrested some people that were squatting in there,
They have.
so.
Okay. All right.
It can't be converted into a dog kennel or anything, huh?
No comment.
Additional upgrades to council chambers, audio-visual broadcast equipment, sort of what I think Danny was talking about with public areas and stuff. Where do we stand with?
Well, we've started that, which is this.
Yep.
We have the second phase, he's replaced some of the boards in the back room. There's more upgrades coming, as well as new cameras and the audio system. And that will tremendously improve the video streaming. That'll be amazing. The cable will always have some video issue because of where it sits on the spectrum bandwidth, we can't compensate for its location on where it lives in their channel lineup, but even that will be dramatically better than what we're seeing now. There's been some improvement with the audio and stuff with the boards that have been replaced, but the cameras need to be digital, and we have those kind of things, and that's all will be implemented in this year. That's why it's on the list.
And the turnover of Central Street from the state we talked about, and that's still in the process.
Yes, and they've done some improvements on, they addressed in a pretty significant way that lake that used to form at the end of Millvale, right before you got to, and we've had some significant rains since they did the work that they did, and I haven't been floating home since they did that, so that's been, but that there's, they haven't completely addressed the issue of water by Ron Russell's, I think it's 15 Central, that they were there this year but they didn't, that's not resolved. That still has ice right down that side, no matter what, and that was supposed to have been addressed. So, there's more things to come, and then there's, paving and whatever agreement we want to do for more of a reclaim from Central Street from Main Street up to Broadway, we'll say, which is where the worst part of Central Street is. Beyond that, paving will work, but up to that maybe up to the bridge that they rebuilt, but that area from Main Street to Franklin and just beyond is,
Are they going to, rip that up and redo it?
that's what the MPI that we were talking about was a project that they would do to do that before they turned it over to the
Because
town.
that section by Wilson's Farm is a little bit rough.
Yeah, that whole, by Wilson's Farm down as far as Millvale, that's the other end that needs to be
Yes.
done the same thing.
Which they were gonna take care of, right, before we, yeah,
Yes.
yep. What do other folks wanna see where we're at, and
I think a big one would be the animal shelter, to get that squared away of where we're gonna put it and a design so we can put it up on the ballot this fall. Cause it's gonna be over 300,000, we know this.
and then be prepared if it doesn't pass?
Yep, Plan B.
Well, hopefully we can raise enough money on that.
Well,
to
I'm
get us
thinking
somewhere.
that this is not gonna be in total out of pocket. If we've have a grant opportunity identified that can provide some significant funding for this. And then I'm pretty confident that if we did a fund drive to contribute to the cost of an animal shelter, that would greatly reduce the amount of tax dollars that were necessary to go into that shelter. So I think, even though we might spend it 300, if it was on if the total that the town was spending was 100, that's different than,
Right.
you know, and I think that that's the more likely scenario. The grant that we're looking at is pretty significant in terms of percentage, and then I think that, my experience is that with the whole animal subject, that people are very generous when it comes to donating for things that are relevant to animals.
Alright.
So the
How-
idea wasn't that it would be 100% funded by town resources. It would be grant and donation in combination with resources, so that it wasn't.
But we still need to get the location.
But it would
and
still need to go, because that's the expense, no matter what the source of the money, it still needs to,
the soundproofing, the layout, just everything.
all that stuff has to get done, yep.
Jim?
How are we coming on, locating a place for a community garden?
Mark had identified one that was at the end of another in-town location. The one at Gardner Commons was a hard no, in terms of, I say hard no, it was not encouraged or desired on the part of that facility they didn't welcome the idea, they had a lot of significant concerns about parking and about people and about kids and somebody getting hit crossing the street, and that turned into zero. The person that was originally sort of spearheading this group, I have not heard from since she was part of the discussion with Gardner Commons that I had on a site visit.
And that was it for locations? We didn't have another location that,
Well, the locations that this group wanted was in town, walkable, sidewalks, and town town water source, which kind of limited us, and there's that one, and then, Mark, what was the one that you?
Well, it'd be the back end of the American Legion on, what would be Mechanic, I think, at that point. We own the back end of that lot. Which
That's-
isn't huge, but it's something.
That's the other location that we came up, that was in town, that the town owned and controlled. I mean, we don't own and control Gardner Commons, we did once upon a time, but,
Any idea how big that is, Mark?
I wanna say quarter of an acre, third of an acre, it's not huge. It's not.
But very possible.
I mean, there's water at the Legion,
Yeah.
so at least there'd be water there, and it's in town, and there's parking at you know, between Lumen Warman and the
Yes.
playground.
That could get developed into a nice little,
And it's a quiet road.
yeah.
Up in Bangor on Essex Street, they got a community garden sitting right on the parking lot.
Yep,
All of the raised beds on, there on the left,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
But, so I guess the bigger question is, I perhaps don't mean this the way it sounds, but the group that came to us that proposed this idea, has the interest since that time been smaller, or?
They haven't been back to us.
Okay.
I don't know that they aren't meeting on their own or looking for, Emily, do you have information on this? Emily has,
Waiting.
Oh.
Basically. But pardon my ignorance, I don't have any idea where the American Legion is.
Right down below the superintendent's office, you know, if you're heading down,
Oh,
yep, heading down Elm Street past the superintendent's office, and you take that right onto Mechanic Street, and it loops around down. It's that big white building that's right there on
yeah,
the corner.
I think that would
It's the back end of that building.
probably spur an increase of conversation.
Yeah, 'cause that's just been there for years.
Never been used.
Yep, yep.
All right.
One thing I did want to add is making cemetery maintenance a regular part of the budget, so we can try to get our cemeteries into reasonable shape.
he didn't wait for that. I already built that into the budget, but, oh well.
Well, I think we've tried to expand on it every year, and it just probably makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
What else?
Cemetery wrong, Jake. T-A-R-Y.
Um,
About the,
I think so, Jim.
No?
Yep.
about the walkway itself, what's our, last I knew there was, still haven't gotten anything official yet, have we?
Yeah, we have the report. We've gotten some sketches and stuff on our proposed, reroute of, by Hoffman Point.
Mm-hmm.
And we're waiting to hear back from them on how they feel about that. And then something's gotta be done on that, because that part of the walkway is not safe right now. So,
We haven't heard back from them.
not yet, but, Rich was speaking with one of the daughters, I guess, or something, and so that's in process. Hopefully we'll know something on that in the next week or two.
We don't know anything money-wise, so.
No, we haven't put anything out to bid or anything.
And Luke, are we looking at this from the you know, when they talked about the 4-foot sea level rise, is any proposed changes looking at that as well? No, okay.
No, I mean, like I discussed with you the other day, Hoffman Point area, that needs to be raised, period, and it needs more riprap. So even if we were gonna keep it where it currently is, you'd have to make some serious changes there, whether that's a shear wall or a lot of fill and riprap, I don't know. That's why we have the engineer, but it's,
Yeah.
that's not safe right now, and it's gotten way worse over the last couple of months.
And there's a few spots where the storms have come in up on.
They have, but it hasn't really, most of them hasn't caused any damage other than during that one,
Yeah.
during the storm. You know, it comes up high and then it recedes, but that area on Hoffman Point is not good. The bricks are just falling right off.
Yeah. Okay.
What else we got, folks?
I'd like to apply for grants to do replacement of some of the sewer pump stations. The one, I'm not sure, we had some significant issues, like one stopped, the one down by Hannaford's, which is very large, and we ended up it going through the Swirl Concentrator building, but we had overflow. It's a violation for DEP. They're not fining us or anything, but those pump stations are, some of them are almost as old as the system for when it was put in, and the need for new controls and those kind of things is, but right now, the state has buckets of money from the Infrastructure Act that they got that is for sewer and water infrastructure. And so I have it on my list to see if you have any objections to me applying for some of that money to see if we can get those pump stations done, because those are big numbers, and I would prefer to use grant money than
Yep.
town
Yes.
money if we could.
Would Maine Water take care of that?
They would take care of the oversight of the engineers and working with all
Right, I
that
don't
kind
mean
of
pay
stuff.
for it, I mean,
No, they would, yes, they
Yeah,
would
they'd
definitely,
monitor it and be in charge of it, right?
yeah, they would do that. But
Who does that work?
whoever is it's an out to bid process to do the work with the pump station, whether it's upgrading the control systems or installing new pumps or whatever. That's all a bid process where whoever the appropriate bid is.
With that in mind, Sue, would it make any sense to look at the sewer line between Bridge and Pine Street with, if there's grant money around, so?
I have to look for every sewer line that we didn't know was there.
Like the one through the baseball field and.
My backyard.
Right.
Well, I guess that's a possibility. I will tell you that my priority is the pump stations, because
Sure.
if those fail, that it can't get to the treatment
Understood.
plant, and then and there's an expectation on the part of DEP that our lines and facilities will be kept in functional order so that we don't have failures that end up putting only partially treated sewage into the river.
One of the things that I've thought about and looked at, and you look at the Down East Sunrise Trail, it's 90 miles, and all these abandoned tracks that we have coming out of here, and, you know, grab a consortium of us in Orrington and Bangor and Brewer and try to, the tourism dollars that this area is missing from what those folks, whether it's bikes, side-by-side, snowmobiles, whatever it is, that this general area, when you look at the maps, there's nothing here, and I don't see those tracks ever coming back to fruition to be used again. And I think it would be, you know, again, with buckets of money that are out there for infrastructure and upgrades and things like that, I think we may be missing the boat if we got together, not on our own, but we grabbed the folks that are on that whole line going up through there, and try to look at doing something where these tourism dollars are just screaming by us.
We've started on that, and Brewer's on board, and they're working on some of that already, going from Brewer to Ellsworth. The holdup for us right now is that Oltercam is still using the tracks from there out for their cleanup. So until that is finished, we're stuck.
Really?
Yeah, but you're right, the tracks from here up to there are.
They've torn up a good amount of
They've torn
them.
up a bunch of them, but the ties are rotten. I mean, you put your finger right through most
Mhm.
of them. They can't be used as they are, so.
And again, I have no idea, I'm just talking out loud, but is there money available to help hurry Holtram along, you know?
There are
Um,
groups that, for that, I don't know.
Well, or somebody to kick them a little bit, and, you know, I mean, Christ, that place has been closed down for 20 years.
The problem is, they have been working on some of the cleanup, and they
find more?
They get it cleaned up and then the government comes in and tests it and they said, nope, still not good enough. And they dig the whole area back up again and clean it again, and it's just really difficult to get it to where
Sure.
it needs to be. So,
Well, at least it's being looked at then, if you're
it is
saying.
absolutely being looked at, and there's a couple people that are on board that are from DC that are pushing, so I mean, there's people that wanna see it happen, and we could connect to the Sunrise Trail because
Yeah.
you
Shoot
know,
down
they've
one
already
of
got exempt tracks that go from Brewer to Ellsworth,
Right.
so.
Right. Like I say, it's amazing, I think, the amount of folks that we could bring in just with,
Yeah.
and they spend money at restaurants and stores and everything else.
And vice versa, people in this community being able to shoot up there
Right.
and go
Right.
wherever.
Right.
With that in mind, should we look at ordinances that, like Greenville allows side-by-sides and stuff in the village? Should we start looking at that?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it's great in Greenville. My big concern is that road with 3 million cars going over
Right.
the harbor.
Yeah, we'd have to have distinctions on where it could be.
But if the tracks, came down, and, if it ever came to fruition where it came down to the north gate or something, then you could have them come down, 15 at least into town and.
Yeah,
put a
and
sign
stop
up,
them at the
no access
bridge.
beyond this or something, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, because I believe Castine tried this with golf carts.
Castine has nothing on golf carts, they're all used.
Well, legally being used, because this is still a state road.
But so is Greenville.
Yeah, Route 15, and yeah, there are ways around it, because 15 in Greenville it's the same 15 we got here, and that's access. It is a town decision, if you want to waive those rights, is the way that I understand it.
Okay.
Sean said he's on board with it, said he wouldn't have been years ago, but now that he's ridden with you guys and you've done it in Greenville, he says he's on board with it.
And we could do golf carts now, for that matter, allow them in town.
Yeah, I think Castine, because it was town roads is what they were concerned about. Because everything from the golf course in is the town.
Okay.
Basically, the state stops right at the sharp
Right.
corner.
Stops right there.
But that's good that they're looking at that, because I think that would be, that's, again, the next wave of what's out there, I think, to come, so. And I think, anything that, and we've talked about it for 9 years I've been here, of how can we get more people to turn left or come into town and get those things done, and, I think we've improved, from where we were. It's just, I don't wanna miss the boat if you say, if they're gonna bring if it goes from Brewer to the Sunrise Trail in Ellsworth, man, 20 miles more, and if we're not involved in that, we are absolutely crazy,
Agreed.
Even if it takes the tracks and we can work with Orrington once you get up there and find some, get out on 15 to get around the tracks where they're using it to whatever, I don't know,
I don't know.
yeah.
I know that if you could use the trail, the tracks as they are now, it would be a beautiful ride. Absolutely stunning
Mhm.
views along the river, and
Yep.
that would be really something.
I would agree.
What about our railroad
Bikers,
tracks
horseback or
on the waterfront? Any?
The ones down here, the last contact we had with the old ones and into the new ones was that, and it's true for the whole thing, that there has to be a federal release of the designation for as tracks in order for them to be turned over, and Pan Am wasn't willing to do that because they were selling to CFX, is that,
something like that.
whoever the initials are,
Something or other, yeah.
for the next one, and that I think the thought was that if there was some kind of project like this, that it would be rather than pick the 1,000 feet or whatever that we've got there, 1,500, I don't know how long it is, that, the abandonment of the whole line would be in one shot with a federal designation would be easier than doing it in pieces.
Because I
What-
think that would help us here too. Like
Oh, yeah.
allow House of Pizza to
Yeah.
cater to That's just an
Move out a
example.
little bit, yeah.
Go to, so you can walk from the waterfront right into it, or on a balcony and other
And the
businesses.
ADAPT plan contemplated that, in that businesses on Main Street who abutted the walking trail would be able to have access that way as well in the nice seasons, so that would, you know, they wouldn't be, it would connect Main Street and the waterfront in a better,
More like Brewer has done.
Going back to the Historical Society, where do the folks with the mill, museum, I guess for lack of a better term, the one that they were gonna put down the old guard shack, is that,
We got an email from Pat Ranzoni probably a week and a half ago, and something about, they don't have a deed yet. So they're still waiting on a deed. But I think, Luke, aren't they in subdivision down there? Isn't that what one of the issues are?
Sorry, where?
Guard check? Down at the mill site?
That is a subdivision issue that they keep asking me to be on the planning board agenda, but they have not submitted a updated subdivision plan with that lot.
that's the last lot that's down there, right, borders ours, it's that, or
Right,
MMA's
but
and
the way
stuff.
the law reads, it says, a division accomplished by sale, transfer, or lease. So even though they're just leasing them that piece of land and giving them the building for $1 a year for 99 years or whatever, it still has to be an updated subdivision plan. But it's a real easy change.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, it would cost next to nothing to do, but for whatever reason, they haven't gotten it done, so.
So to Steve's point, and again, you know, looking at that building down there, it's a, you know, is there a possibility to bring the whole Historical Society in with the Mill Museum?
Is it
With-
big enough?
They
It is pretty big.
They said no.
They
They
said
said
no,
no.
but could you add on? I
Well,
mean,
I was gonna say, what they said and what we would maybe throw out there as some
Compromise,
incentive
yeah.
and compromise, you know, and work towards, I mean, cause that building does need some work. But where I sit, it serves a couple purposes that maybe, you know, takes care of a couple issues. And again, the way things are looking here, I mean, if some of these other things happen and that is all of a sudden the anchor at the end of a road where you've got tourism coming through,
that's totally good.
so, you know, do we bring,
They don't have the staff to run 2 facilities. I don't know how they're planning to do that.
They said they didn't have, they weren't gonna have any more hours when they were here, you know, despite having 2 locations.
But again, there are other ways, you know, I've seen these pop up with it, you don't have to have staff, you know, again, it's sketchy, but you can have an open area in there for certain hours and, you know, if people wanna go in, put a camera up and, I look
But
at,
my point was that I agreed with you that having it in one location,
yeah.
having 2 locations, I think is just,
And again,
Even
if you make something that's nice and looks good, all of a sudden the volunteers start to show up a little bit more too. You know, there may be other folks that are looking at it that, I don't wanna go sit in an old moldy building, but if we've got something that covers a lot of the history of Bucksport, including
Yeah,
what we
I'd
had
be
for
fine
100
with that.
years, it may be something that will pan out a little bit more, so. You know, maybe when we talk to the historical folks, we can grab somebody from the mill thing and kinda,
Well, they say they're one entity.
I-
That's what Pat said.
I don't know how they differentiate resources there. I'm not clear on that. Yeah.
Well, the paper-making museum folks have raised $10,000 in fundraising that's not associated with the Historical Society. This specific topic has raised $10,000, so
again, I think if you get folks together and you come try to figure out what is gonna work for a lot of people, try to, as we use new vernacular, break down barriers and collaborate and work together.
Goals.
Right?
So you say they've raised $10,000, but it has nothing to do with the Historical Society. What did they raise it for?
they raised it to do the legal work and to get a start on what that building needs for
This is from the Mill Museum folks.
the Mill
right?
Museum, yes. They've raised, some of it was legal work, and some of it is, the building itself when but they had raised $10,000, and I know that it was not for the Historical Society, it was dedicated specifically to the acquisition of this building,
By
for this.
the Historical Society.
Well,
Well, Pat says she's a subcommittee of the Historical Society.
yeah, but the donations were specifically dedicated to this one topic.
Project.
It's not in general to fix the mold issue.
I think it'd be worth it to get everybody in the room together for an hour just to figure out who's going in which direction and can we find some compromise, and if not, then we can't, but at least I think if everybody's talking the same language, you know, maybe we'll find a happy medium. And again, I think, you know, from what I've heard, that, you know, is the council's not against putting some resources towards fixing these things up if it's the right opportunity. So, you know, I think there's just, you know, like I say, get these folks together and figure out if we're all on the same page or if we're 9 miles apart. So,
Yeah, like you said, I agree that we need to preserve the items they have in the building, but we need to do it. We need to make a decision this year, just like you
Yep.
said.
Yep.
Because we've been talking about this
Yep.
for the past 3 years anyway.
right.
Started right before COVID.
Yeah. All right. I don't wanna take up a lot of people's time here, and again, you know, looking at what we've done, what we've got going forward, and just the normal business of running the town, you know, again, I think I speak for everybody, I commend what Sue and her staff and everybody that works for the town, has done to get us through. You know, I look at it as the last 9 years since, you know, since the mill shut down and where we're going and what we've accomplished. A lot of things ahead. I think that will further to define us and keep setting us apart. Keep getting little, maybe not, but, you know, recognitions that, you know, may not mean a whole lot other than a piece of paper on the wall, but, you know, every bit of advertising helps when you get named this or do that, and you have folks show up on different occasions for different things, so.
People are still reaching out to Bucksport for the how. Yeah, the why aren't you dead version of, you know, in comparison to communities that have experienced significant business loss, job loss, and those kind of things.
And again, part of our history, but I think it's time that we've moved beyond that and we're really moving forward and keeping going in that direction, you know. And if they ask, certainly we'll answer it, but that's not what wants to define us now is.
I
Yeah.
refer to it as the foundation on which the town is moving forward.
There we go. Anything else, folks? All right.
What do we think about putting an engineer on the payroll? I've asked this every year.
You have, and I think
We utilize Oliver for general engineering on an as-needed basis as opposed to having an employee who's an engineer. And the reason that we've generally done that is that one engineer can't cover every kind of engineering that you do, and having an engineer doesn't mean they do the plans or the designs for things. They evaluate something that needs to be done, and then you've gotta have it drawn and designed anyway. And looking at what we've expended for out-of-pocket engineers over the number of years we've done it, the costs, the way we've been doing it on a contracted as-need basis is cheaper than a full-time employee with benefits, especially for licensed engineer, which is expensive, but that's why I mean, I'm happy to put anything the council wants in the budget, but if you're asking me my rationale why I've not done that, that's why.
Has the firm that we use ever failed to produce or in a timely manner of what we've asked them to do, both in resources and in a time frame? Have they always done what we needed them to do?
as far as I'm concerned. I mean, has everyone always liked the outcome? No.
No.
But that's not, I don't think that's your question.
But no, has there, when we come to them with a need for any sort of engineering, have they come to us in a timely manner, and have they fulfilled the requirement of what we've asked?
Yes.
Okay.
One of the things that we did at the academy, and again, it's a school of engineers, and came up with the same rationale. We put out an RFP for engineering services. And again, it kept who we had, you know, just, I won't say put them on notice, but I think it was our due diligence to just go, we had them for a number of years. Again, no issues, but again, due diligence, I think, on our part to see what was out there and if we were, you know, still getting market rate and stuff. And maybe that's something to look at, is maybe put out an RFP for engineering services. Because I really do think that you're not gonna find that, well, yeah, you certainly can find that one that will do it all, but it'll cost you an awful lot of money. One of the other things we looked at was the liability piece. You know, with our folks engineering these things, the liability would have fallen straight on the academy, whereas now we've hired a firm. They have a suite of professionals that could be civil, that could be mechanical, that could be electrical.
Right.
And we were able to use all those services, so.
Yeah.
And the RPK gave us the same folks we had, you know, and again, it wasn't a bad thing, it was just a due diligence type of thing, so.
Yeah, that makes sense when you put it like that, when you have different forms of engineers, and we can just reach out to a firm and get specifically what we want. And it's not I mean, what's the frequency that we would need engineering?
Again, it all depends on what it's like having, we don't have a town attorney on retainer, we
Right.
don't have a town engineer
Right.
on retainer. We have a firm that we've used because they are familiar with the community, they've designed a lot of the projects, the walls, the sewer treatment plant, you know, a lot of things, so their historical knowledge gives them a leg up when they start looking at something else, they already have a familiarity. But I don't disagree that sort of doing RFP, but I would not recommend that we look for a retainer-based anything, I really.
No, basically it's a as needed type of,
Yeah,
what
just-
do you pay for services? This is, give us basically a shopping cart, a la carte,
Yep.
this and this. I mean, that's kinda how I would think we could look at it.
Yeah, we could do that just to, you know, keep things honest,
Again, it's
but
nothing
it
more
would be
than a
hard.
check.
It would be, you know, it would be hard to compete, to be honest, only because of the long-term
Yep.
historical knowledge.
And
If the-
that's what we found at the school, it was the same thing, that we just did it and it came out that it was the same folks and we're okay, that was good, but. So.
One thing I forgot about was, what we're gonna do with the baseball field.
So what I saw on here is that it's surviving and it's all good and we're not gonna touch it anymore.
I thought that's what
That was the resolve of the committee, I thought.
that was
Yeah.
what the committee came up with, that
That wasn't a permanent thing, that was just.
Well, that it wasn't moving and there was no need to do anything until something changed, I thought, but maybe I remember.
You're right, Ed, they didn't say it was permanent, but they did say it was safe for the kids to get on there and play. And
Right.
it would be for a long period of time. It
Yeah.
wasn't something they fixed for a year, put a Band-Aid on, they fixed it to.
It would
so
last
it
several
survive.
years, no problem.
Yeah.
the adjustment just the slight adjustment in the street orientation of paving, and Wardwell did a good job with that interim, that's moving the water away from that wall, and what they did has stabilized it in such a way that, it was my understanding that was sort of it was okay until or unless there was gonna be some other decision made on the future of that whole facility, and whether or not the baseball field in
Was
it
gonna
for its
stay
whole life
there.
was gonna stay
Right.
there, or might go up to the school complex at some, and anyone watching, please, that's not my idea, don't come beat me up tomorrow. But that was the committee's it was my understanding, was the committee's kind of overall thought was, it's stable, it's safe to play on, it doesn't have the water issues have been eliminated, that wouldn't be a priority for spending $100,000 or $200,000 on that, if in 5 or 6 years or even 10, that it might not have that function anymore. It might have moved somewhere else. That's the only reason that I didn't put that back on, was because I thought that the committee had kind of determined that it could hold a turn on that for a few years to see what direction things were going.
When these engineering people did the parking lot down here, behind the one on Central Street, they wrote out a contract for their contractors that done the work. And they were responsible for final inspection on everything that was done, but they took no responsibility for anything that didn't come out that failed. Right in their contract. We won't be responsible for anything that don't go right, but we're gonna get the final inspection before it gets covered. That's how the contract read.
Sue, what do you, is that like a common clause, like, for that type of work?
That's not uncommon for engineers to say our recourse with installations is if work fails, something that at the end of the day didn't perform in the same way it was. If it was an engineering issue, not a construction issue, then that is the engineering side's responsibility. But if it's a construction issue,
Right.
that's not the way it is. But on the walls, for example, we had to have an engineering inspection of those in order to qualify for the state's money. It required that an engineering inspection be done of those, and that was, those were part of that. Those contracts had to have that, but the contractor that did the work is also on the hook for failures in terms of
Right.
that. A lot of communities have, when roads are being developed, are gonna be turned over to them, they require that whoever's doing it have a bond or have money set aside that the town holds for, in Hamden, it was 14 months after construction, that if anything didn't work, we had a pot of money to access
what
from
may have been
someone
broken.
Right.
that,
So the firm we're using isn't putting in uncommon clauses then?
no,
Okay.
if you, any design you get from an architect says right on the thing that if they miss something, like a handicapped access, which they did in Hamden when we built added on to the thing, the access to get in the front door had a curve across the whole front. It didn't have a thing, and that change order for that design was not, you made a mistake, you didn't do it. It was a change order and an additional cost.
Oh, boy.
What I would ask or suggest, or, this is, we come up with stuff all the time, throughout the course of a year or when we're talking about things. So if you have something that pops up that you think about, let myself or the town manager know. You can bring it up at a council meeting, and I don't think we've not ever looked at something when somebody's brought up an idea that's either come from themselves or from a member of the public. So this list is certainly not all encompassing. Certainly lives like it's lived for the last few years that we've done this, and sort of guides us a little bit, but there's always things that are gonna pop up that we have no control over that derails us, speaking of tracks.
That's a good point. Nowhere on this list is there the word landfill, and I have a feeling we'll be discussing that quite a bit.
Come on, I didn't wanna bring that one up.
Yep, that'll be brought up in 2023 a few times. Yep.
Yes.
I'd like to, if we could, just, doesn't have to be this year, but in the next 2 to 3 years, I'd like to see us determine about the baseball field. Is it staying or going, so we can make progress
Sure.
accordingly?
Because they redid the other one, didn't they, up to the junior high?
I think they finished it.
I think so. Do you know, Luke, did they do the?
We're supposed to be using those fields this
Right.
upcoming year for soccer
think if we can determine in the next 2 or 3 years of whether it's staying or moving,
Yep.
then we could proceed with what are we
Long-term
doing for
fix or not.
repairs or
Yep.
whatever.
I received another item from a resident who said, could the town engage the Board of Gardner Commons to explore the feasibility of expanding this program at a nearby site? Gardner Commons has been an outstanding success with an excellent occupancy rate and ongoing waiting list. Can also offer supportive housing to older adults on the lower end of the moderate income scale. I'm not
Don't
sure
know
what
what
the
that means.
location, well, no, it's talking about the town and Eastern Area Agency on Aging, I think it was, partnered when they turned the town turned the school over to that process, and it was, so I don't know what the alternate location is, but
Okay.
that, unless we kick the superintendent out of the offices. And then we had another resident who suggested, approving any solar projects that came to town, the feasibility of electric lawnmowers, purchasing a hybrid police cruiser, and installing bike racks.
Okay. All right. Anything else? If not, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Next week, we do have, you did set up a